Soldiers now being sent into North Carolina. Did the commander-in-chief just draw a red line with Iran? And picket lines all up and down the East Coast. That's Topping the Hill on NewsNation. All right, so now the calendar is cleared with 33 days to go. Good evening and welcome to Washington. I'm Blake Berman. After the final debate this election cycle focused on policy among fathers from the Midwest, the vice presidential hopefuls out on the campaign trail today and on the attack.
It is disqualifying to not acknowledge that the 2020 election was won by Joe Biden.
I feel a little bad for Governor Walz. And the reason I feel bad for him is because he has to defend the indefensible, and that is the record of Kamala Harris.
And today, the White House incumbents were across the southeast United States, surveying the damage left behind from the second worst hurricane of the last half century. Vice President Kamala Harris visiting the swing state of Georgia.
I am here to personally take a look at the devastation, which is extraordinary, and it is and particularly devastating in terms of the loss of life.
On his way to the Carolinas, President Biden today warning the massive East and Gulf Coast port strikes is only making it harder to get supplies into the southeastern part of the country. And when asked about the major foreign issue, the commander-in-chief seemingly drew a red line. He does not believe Iranian nuclear facilities should be a retaliatory target.
There is no. I think there's things that we'll be discussing with the Israelis what they're going to do, but they should respond in proportion.
We begin tonight here on the Hill once again in the state of North Carolina, where 1,000 Army troops active are now being sent in for the recovery efforts across that state. Our Brooke Schaefer once again in the hard-hit area of Asheville this evening. Brooke?
Yeah, hey there, Blake. Here in the River Arts District of Asheville, you can see there is still a long road of cleanup ahead because you can see this area is still caked in mud. The road, cars, businesses covered in mud. And this is one of the areas that President Biden got an aerial tour of earlier today. He said that those extra troops are going to immediately head to some of the hardest hit areas where we know that search and rescue is still happening as we speak. We know a lot of that search and rescue happening up in the mountains by helicopter. Earlier today, the governor of North Carolina said that about 1,400 people have been rescued so far. Still, this area, though, even as recovery and supplies are starting to pour in, they are in desperate need, Blake, of things like power, gas, running water, and cell phone service. Still no time frame on when those things could be back up and running. President Biden looking at some of the devastation today, he called it heartbreaking. Blake.
Our Brooke Schaefer live once again tonight in Western North Carolina. Brooke, thank you. As I mentioned, Vice President Harris surveyed the damage earlier today in Augusta, Georgia. That is along the South Carolina border. Her visit comes just 2 days after Donald Trump met with storm victims and responders in Valdosta, Georgia, just north of the Florida border. Julia Manchester, national political reporter for The Hill, joins us now. Julia, you've been writing about this this week on thehill.com. This is a very thin line that both of these candidates, Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, running for the White House, are trying to walk right now with visits to swing states experiencing devastation.
Yeah, well, let's first start off with Harris. She is in the state in her official capacity as vice president. Right. And that's sort of a home field advantage she has here. She is able to, in a way, use the office of the vice president to showcase her own leadership in a crisis. It gives voters that sort of sneak preview as to what that would look like. For Donald Trump, it's a bit more awkward because he's obviously has this experience as a former president, has dealt with past hurricanes, but he's not the president right now. So when he goes in, and whenever any of these major figures come in, it's always a logistical, sort of tightrope they have to walk. So Donald Trump has to be careful. We know that he's been raising money, but it's a little more awkward.
Does it tell you, does it say anything to you about where they went? Kamala Harris by the South Carolina border, Donald Trump by the Florida border.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. They're obviously both going to these two swing states, but, Donald Trump by the Florida border, we know that, that's his home state, yeah. Florida. Also not a swing state this election, but, people are paying a little attention to it. And then Kamala Harris, obviously, by that South Carolina border. It's interesting to watch.
Julia Manchester, national political reporter for The Hill. See you here in a little bit. Julia, thank you. Now, if you want to help those impacted by Hurricane Helene, NewsNation is working with the American Red Cross to raise money to help victims of Helene. All you have to do right there, scan the QR code on the middle left side of your screen there to learn how to donate. All right, live look right now in Haifa, Israel. It is just past midnight there in the Middle East as Jews begin to celebrate the start of their new year. Tonight, though, questions about how Israel might respond to the barrage of ballistic missiles fired by Iran. President Biden says Iranian nuclear facilities should be off limits. Congressman Adam Smith is the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. We'll speak with him in a moment. But first tonight, to Senator Pete Ricketts, Republican from North Carolina, who is on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thanks for being with us once again here on the Hill. The president seemingly drawing a red line today with Iran, basically saying the nuclear facilities should be off limits. Does he have it right?
Absolutely not. The president has no right to tell Israel how it's going to defend itself. In fact, this president has just had an appeasement first policy with Iran, and it's his weakness that has encouraged Iran to attack our ally Israel. What we need to be doing is saying, hey, we are going to support our ally when they retaliate for this brazen attack that violates all international norms by attacking Israel directly. And the only thing, frankly, that these dictators understand is force, and that's what has to be used back on them. So we need to support Israel when they do this. And frankly, you know what? We've been through this before. Ronald Reagan knew how to handle it. When the Iranians were trying to sink our Navy ships, he started sinking their Navy ships. And guess what? They figured it out. They backed off. That's what Israel needs to do, and we need to support them and can't take anything off the table.
Okay, so you say can't take anything off the table and you disagree with the commander-in-chief. Your colleague, Lindsey Graham, Republican, South Carolina, said there should be an overwhelming response, and he says, starting with Iran's ability to refine oil. Are you good to go after the oil fields in Iran? Would you support that?
I would support Israel when they retaliate against Iran, and I think we should help them do it. Here's the part of what's happened here is because we have been weak with the sanctions, Iran has been able to generate a lot of oil money they have used to be able to fund groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. And that's why they're so brazen, because we don't do anything about it. We need to start striking back and let Israel decide how they're going to handle this and then support them. And frankly, if we see that the Iranians are continuing to target our ships, for example, the Red Sea, we should be doing all we can to prevent that. If they've got ships there, we should sink them.
Let me ask you about the debate last night. J.D. Vance, your colleague, you're a Republican in the Senate. Here was the Wall Street Journal today. Headline, quote, at least from the editorial board, Vance makes a better case for Trump than Trump. Wall Street Journal again, headline, J.D. Vance's version of Trump is better than the real thing. Here was J.D. Vance last night. I'll get your reaction on the other side.
What's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment.
That obviously not J.D. Vance. That is Tim Walz. Let me ask you about the headlines, though, Senator. And I said you were from North Carolina. Obviously, that stayed on our mind, as you are well aware. You're from Nebraska. What do you make of the Wall Street Journal outlining there? You know what? Maybe J.D. Vance is the best messenger for conservatives at this point in time, better than Donald Trump.
Well, J.D. did a great job last night. I'm so proud of my colleague. And I think some of the things he pointed out is exactly how liberal this Harris-Walz ticket is. Harris is a San Francisco liberal.
But did he enunciate that better than Trump?
I think he did a fantastic job. Donald Trump is going to be Donald Trump, and he does a great job of carrying his message, but I think he picked a great running mate in J.D. and really exposed how liberal that this ticket is on the Democrat side, and it's not something that Americans want.
Senator Pete Ricketts, state of Nebraska. Appreciate the time, sir. We'll have you back on here soon. Pete Ricketts. Thank you, sir.
Great.
Senator
Thank you very much.
All right, with us now, Congressman Adam Smith. He is the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, nice to have you back here on the Hill. We just played that soundbite there from Tim Walz. Let's start there. Tim Walz was asked last night about the advice that he would give to Kamala Harris if she were to become the commander-in-chief. And that was his response as it relates to Iran. He started talking about Donald Trump and crowd sizes. And if that was his go-to answer, Congressman, why should the American public feel, if Kamala Harris wins, that Tim Walz is the right person to be giving her advice in this situation?
Sorry, I don't accept your assessment there. I didn't see all of the debate. I didn't see what Tim did not say, but I don't know what the questions were or what else was going on. It's completely wrong to say that Tim Walz doesn't think that Iran is important or how to handle it, or that his answer would be about Trump's crowd size. He was trying to win a debate. So let's just move that question to the side for the moment and ask the more legitimate question of what would a President Harris do about the situation in Iran? I think she would follow up on a lot of what...
I was going to ask you that, Congressman, but he didn't directly answer the question. And it is the top responsibility, or up there, for a vice president. I didn't see the question. I didn't see the answer. I'm not really in a position to evaluate that one little clip and whether or not he answered the question or whether it dealt with it or not. I'm sorry. I didn't watch that. I didn't see that. And it's not a useful amount of my time to try to defend one particular answer by Tim Walz in debate. If you want to talk about Iran or even the campaign more broadly, happy to do so. How do you think Kamala Harris, or at least Joe Biden, President Biden, should respond? There's a lot out there right now with what he said today, what Republicans have said. What's the right response? Continue to support Israel. I think that's really important. Look, Israel tried to work with Hezbollah for a long period of time to say, stop lobbing missiles at us. They wanted to negotiate a 10-mile buffer zone. Hezbollah refused to do that, and Israel responded by taking out Hezbollah. And now they're going after the Houthis, and they've gone after Hamas as well very aggressively. And we support that, and President Biden has continued to support that. We have armed Israel and helped them. Even in this most recent attack from Iran, U.S. forces were involved in helping defend Israel. I think we need to continue to do that. I don't agree with the assessment that all they understand is strength. We have to hit them anywhere and everywhere. Let's remember, going back to Ronald Reagan, that Hezbollah committed 2 suicide bombing attacks against the U.S. Marine barrack and against our embassy. And Ronald Reagan just pulled out. Okay, he didn't stay in and fight because sometimes you don't want the wider war. I think there's a balance that needs to be struck, but we are unquestionably supporting Israel and their right to defend themselves right now. Did President Biden, as you see it, Congressman, draw a red line today, and was he right to do so, if so? I don't think he did draw a red line, and I don't personally believe in red lines. I think you need to give yourself maximum amount of flexibility. So no, I think he was offering advice, but I tend to agree that we should support Israel in their efforts to defend themselves, and that Iran has to pay a price for their support for Hezbollah, for their support for Hamas, for their support for the Houthis. Iran is the primary driver behind the destabilization of the Middle East, and they should be held accountable for that. Congressman Adam Smith, Democrat from the state of Washington, top Democrat on the Armed Services Committee in the House. Congressman, thanks for being back with us once again here on the Hill. Great. Thanks for the chance. You got it. All right. Meantime, Jack Smith's 165-page argument against Donald Trump now unsealed this evening. This is the special counsel's response to the Supreme Court ruling that presidents are immune from prosecution for actions they take as part of their core constitutional responsibilities. Smith is arguing that when, quote, the defendant, Donald Trump, lost the 2020 presidential election, he resorted to crimes to stay in office, end quote. Chris Steyerwalt, host of The Hill Sunday, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, NewsNation political editor. Hello, sir.
First, let me say, Congressman Smith's answer was pretty baller. I didn't watch the debate. Wasn't a good use of my time. We need more. We need more of that sort of abandoned disregard for politics from a politician.
How so? Sitting congressman.
What does he need to watch that debate for? I mean, look, that's an important debate. That was an important debate if you're trying to make up your mind about this race. I doubt he's a persuadable voter, right? I doubt Congressman Smith is like, maybe Trump, maybe Harris.
Right.
But what that debate was important for, and I thought it was elucidated, was that if you are one of the very small, the vanishingly small number of Americans who are genuinely undecided or undecided whether you'll go vote, that was a useful debate because
policy.
Well, it was rich on policy, but also you got a sense of who J.D. Vance wants to be and who Tim Walz wants to be and what kind of figures they would be in administration. I thought it was all useful and helpful. But no, if you're in Congress, I don't think his vote's up for grabs.
Let me ask you about Jack Smith today. What does that mean for Donald Trump, if anything?
Well, J.D. Vance had a 9 out of 10 debate, but the one where he missed was on January 6th.
At the very end there, yeah.
That was a Lulu every bit as bad as Tim Walz's knucklehead when he vapor locked talking about that stuff. J.D. Vance's inability to speak the truth and say the honest thing about Donald Trump in the 2020 election speaks to a problem that the Republicans have, which is that Donald Trump won't let them say the thing that is both true and politically expedient.
And you got the Journal pointing out today, maybe J.D. Vance might actually be the best messenger for that sort of vision.
Sure,
at this point in time.
And when Jack Smith comes out with this huge filing, it reinforces the same thing. The voters that the Republicans need are the same voters that the Democrats are fighting for right now. When they put the Cheneys out there and they put those folks out there, they say, you can't vote for Donald Trump. And Jack Smith is making the same argument.
So many questions for you. You'll be back later in the show.
So good.
Steyerwalt's going to be breaking down North Carolina, more on the debate as well. Before we head to break, though, live look at Norfolk State University, less than 1 hour away, about 44 minutes. From the Virginia Senate debate, the incumbent Senator Tim Kaine will face off against his Republican challenger Hung Cao. NewsNation will simulcast the debate. You can catch it right here after the Hill, 7 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock in Virginia, 6 o'clock Central, right here on NewsNation. Still to come, though, from the Hill, tens of thousands of dock workers hitting the picket line at ports all across the East Coast in a move that could seriously rattle the economy, and right before the election. Plus, is it possible to have no tax on tips for service workers in Las Vegas? We are live in Sin City. And Steyerwalt, as I mentioned, back to break down some numbers. I think that the Trump and Harris campaigns would say, oh, that's good. Maybe I might be a little bit worried here. North Carolina, what we're seeing around the country as well. Chris is back. You're watching The Hill. Stay with us.
Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on.
The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue and then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class.
That, of course, Tim Walz, J.D. Vance discussing part of their economic positions during the vice presidential debate last evening. The economy, we've been talking about this over and over again. Issue number one, especially in the swing states. One of those key states, Nevada. And as part of our continuing Swing State Spotlight series, tonight we focus on the Silver State, a campaign proposal that is gaining popularity there, an idea first floated by former President Trump. No taxes on tips. Joining us live from Las Vegas is our next star colleague, KLAS reporter John Langler, host of the Politics Now show, rather. John, thanks for being with us here on the Hill. Appreciate it. So no taxes on tips. Donald Trump's talking about it. Kamala Harris said, you know what, that's a good idea. How's this viewed out there in Nevada? Is this pocket aces running an inside straight? What is it out there?
You know, Blake, you can use any sort of casino metaphor you like. I'm sure all will apply. Certainly, people will be supportive of the idea of making money and not having it taxed. And because so many of the workers here in Las Vegas and in Southern Nevada work in the resorts, work in the casinos, tips are a big portion of their take-home pay. So the idea of it not being taxed got pretty much across the board pretty rave reviews from people that we spoke with. But what is interesting, though, is that, you know, you mentioned that former President Trump brought this up in June. The Culinary Union, one of the biggest power brokers in Southern Nevada, in Las Vegas, 60,000 members strong, they dismissed it initially. They've kind of changed their tune, but initially they thought it was kind of a stunt. We actually went to a roundtable and heard some of their thoughts.
That means nothing. And the people who are espousing that right now, to me, mean nothing unless they put a plan and say, okay, this is how it's going to work. And what about the other states and all that? You need to have something more than just say, okay, we're going to have no tax on tip. That means it is a slogan.
So that was right after former President Trump's speech here back in earlier in the summer. The skepticism didn't last long. Democrats soon jumped on board. Both Democratic senators of Nevada, the congressional delegation. We've heard from Vice President Kamala Harris, who said she supports it as well. And then earlier this month, Nevada Congressman Stephen Horsford proposed his own proposal, the TIPS Act, which is a different version of it. Let's see if we can hear him talk about. We've heard him talk about this. It's his method of no taxes on tips. We'll have to see if it really goes anywhere, though.
Hey, John, real quick. Obviously, economy issue number one. Within the economy, no taxes on tips. Where does that fall?
Well, it falls pretty high in Southern Nevada. I think we've done some polling through The Hill, of course, 8 News Now. We've looked at what people think about the biggest issue in Southern Nevada, in all of Nevada. And it's the economy. And the economy isn't just taxes on tips. It's housing prices, cost of groceries. Those are nationwide issues, of course. Taxes on tips is up there. It's not the main issue, though.
Interesting. John Langler, KLAS TV out there in Nevada. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Great reporting. All right, still much more ahead here on the Hill. Ports from Maine all the way to Florida, out west to Texas shut down. President Biden saying this is already impacting the Southeast. Our next guest explains why there's a chance this could be a long strike. And do you want to bet on parts of the November election? Want to put your money where your mouth is? Why, a judge says you can now do just that. You're watching The Hill. All right, welcome back here to The Hill on NewsNation. Alcohol, flat screen television, your medicines. Just some of what will no longer be allowed to come through ports all across the eastern part of our country. That's because some 45,000 dock workers from New England to the Gulf Coast remain on strike. And today, the president, who was supporting the workers, said the strike is impacting the battered Southeast.
We're getting pushback already. We're hearing from the folks regionally that they're having trouble getting product they need because of the port strike.
Our Alina Shirazi is along the picket line tonight at the Port of Baltimore. You could see those workers there behind her. They've been there for 2 days. Alina, what are they telling you?
Good evening, Blake. Good to be with you. Well, I think the persistence is key here. They're telling me they've been tired. They actually have been here with them since really the morning hours yesterday at midnight. Their contracts did expire Monday, but they tell me they're tired. Some of them did go home. They came back. Some of them brought their kids, but they say they're not leaving. They're going to stay here until they get the green light, until some sort of negotiation comes through. I want you to take a little walk with me here so I can just set the scene so you can see how many people are here. You can see them still picketing here, a lot of them holding signs that show you what they're really asking for, right? Some of them are saying machines don't feed families. No work without a fair contract. No work without a contract. They have been here for quite some time. As opposed to yesterday, since I've been here, I can tell you double the people, cars lined up on both sides of the road, and people telling me they left and came back again this morning. We know the United States Maritime Alliance offered the union a 50% wage hike. They just sent me an update saying their focus now is on negotiating. There's also a financial impact here, Blake. We know that reports estimate there's about up to $4 billion that could be lost every single day for the U.S. economy if these strikes continue. So we're going to be out here continuing to monitor what happens, but these people still telling me they're staying strong and they're not leaving. Blake.
Alina Shirazi live for us tonight in Baltimore. Alina, thank you. Joining us now, Ryan Peterson. He is the founder and CEO of Flexport. Ryan, I tell you, has as good of a view into this shipping logjam and what's going on all over the world as anyone. Ryan, once again, here on the Hill. Thanks for being back with us, Ryan. Day two of this, I'm looking at a map, and you probably know a lot better than I am what I'm looking at, but I'm seeing ships stacked up on the East Coast. Are we starting to feel the effects yet, or if not, when?
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me on again. I think it's a little too early to say we're feeling the effects. I mean, certainly some importers are starting to worry about their containers stuck at the port. Flexport alone, we're one of the largest shipping companies in the U.S. We have about 250 containers sitting at these ports that we weren't able to get out. You know, we scrambled. We got about half of our containers out but a lot of them are still stuck there, having cleared customs or not yet released by the shipping companies before the ports close. So yeah, there's some effect, but that's sort of an edge around the edges. I don't think consumers are feeling this yet. It'll have to go on for a few weeks before you start to really see big impacts in supply chains.
I saw you post that you think there's probably about an 85% chance or so, 80% chance that this gets figured out this week, or a 15% chance that this goes a month. Where are you tonight?
Yeah, well, you know what? I said that yesterday, and every day that goes on, there's less time this week to get it done. So probably... You know, the odds of this going on longer have definitely increased. But these labor disputes tend to get solved in the first 4 or 5 days historically. And I don't just mean the port unions, but just generally. Strikes don't usually go that long. We will find out right now. The fact that Biden has come out pretty forcefully taking the side of the workers and putting pressure on the employers. The employers have offered a 50% wage increase. The union is asking for a 77% wage increase.
Yeah,
they're not off by that much, in my view. So I could see a deal getting done, but if it doesn't, then this is not all for symbolism. This is real, and they're gonna battle it out. And it might take a long time.
So Goldman Sachs, Ryan, came out and said if this goes for 10 days, this would mean about 45,000 job losses. 0.2% of GDP. Translation, that is tens of billions of dollars. You just told me that some sort of 250 containers, I believe, at least that companies that you deal with are stuck there. Are the companies starting to raise prices right now?
Yeah,
shipping costs going up.
Yeah, you've seen it a little bit. There's a lot of fees that are coming in that are starting to get imposed. I think ocean freight's actually pretty regulated by the Federal Maritime Commission. So it'll take, they have to publish those in advance. A bunch of carriers have declared force majeure on freight headed to the East Coast for obvious reasons. They can't honor any contracts. But freight coming to the West Coast hasn't yet spiked. But I think it's also because people are waiting to see. I mean, does this get resolved this week? If so, you don't need to change any habits. But if it starts to run week after week, then a lot of the volumes that would be headed to the East Coast typically will start to divert to the West Coast, and the price, there's just not enough capacity on ships going to the West Coast. The price will go to the moon like we saw during COVID, where the prices went up 10x. And that hasn't happened yet, but I think it's really the wait and see moment.
Okay, so that's wait and see. So when would it be felt, right? There's an election November 5th that voters in some 20 states are already voting now. When would this be felt?
Yeah, I mean, it probably is a little bit of a lag and towards the end of this month and maybe even after the election when the real impact starts to hit. And what happens here is the freight that's building up, they will just build these big bottlenecks, just backups of cargo waiting to move that can't get in. It's both going to be sitting off the shore as more and more ships start piling up there waiting in a queue, right, but also all around the world where containers are just sitting waiting to get loaded for the East Coast. And so then once the thing does open up, you still have to clear that bottleneck, and it'll be a race to who's willing to pay the most to get onto ships. And so the price is for sure going to go up in the ocean freight market.
Ryan Peterson, founder, CEO of Flexport. Thanks for being back with us tonight, Ryan. If this keeps going, we'll talk to you again soon. Ryan Peterson, thanks so much.
Thank you.
You got it. All right, joining me now here on the Hill, Ashley Davis, former George W. Bush White House official, and Scott Bolden, former D.C. Democratic Party chair, NewsNation contributor. Hello to you both. Nice to have you in. You were nodding your head yes alongside all of that. Why?
I think Ryan's exactly right. I think that in order for this to impact the election, we probably have till the end of this week before anything really matters. But I've been talking a lot to the medical supplier industry as well as the pharmaceutical industry. What they're concerned about is every day that there is a strike, it takes 5 to 7 to get caught up from the congestion.
Right.
So really you lose a week every time you lose a day. And so they're concerned for the products that come from overseas, especially things as gloves, gauze that you don't have in stockpile, syringes. That's the stuff that really was backed up during COVID, that they don't keep an extra amount of supplies here in the United States, and that's what the concern.
So you take President Biden at his word. He said today that this is already being impacted in areas in the southeast. That's where these ports are. Of course, Helene, that's where it devastated. I wonder, though, Scott, if part of the political calculation here is, okay, maybe we can let this run if the impacts aren't going to be felt until, after all the votes are counted.
I don't think Biden or Harris is thinking like that. I think they're thinking that we need to get this done, and I'm sure they're pressing both sides. 50% increase after 6 or 7 years of no wage increase is pretty fair. They want 77. If I was at the negotiation table, I'd split the baby and say, let's go home. But here, let me tell you, when we run out of alcohol in this country, right, that's going to be the real determiner, if you ask me.
But I mean, it's everyday items, right? And I think, when you get to medicines and stuff like that, for the president to come out today and say what he did certainly catches your attention. Ashley?
Well, no, I just want to say, but I really think it's not just the ports, it's the truckers, it's the railroads.
Downstream effects.
Where are the truckers? Because that could help ease this back.
Truckers, rail, all of it.
They're going to support
you
them.
name it, if you own a store, etc. All right, I'll see you both here in a few. Still to come on the Hill, Chris Steyerwalt on the other side of the break. The numbers catching his attention in North Carolina and across the swing states. Steyerwalt breaking it down. 4 minutes away.
NewsNation is the only cable news network to bring you the Senate debates from key battleground states. First up, Virginia, where Tim Kaine faces off with Hung Kao. Debate night in America. Tonight, 7/6 Central, only on NewsNation.
All right, welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. 34 days until Election Day, and we have new polling in the key battleground state of North Carolina. A must-win for Donald Trump. So what about the numbers there? What does it tell us? Chris Steyerwalt is back. Hello, sir.
Oh, baby. North Carolina is the Pennsylvania of the Red Wall.
Okay.
Right? It's crucial.
Yep.
It's the polls close early. We'll get, actually, by the way, one thing we should do, keep thinking about North Carolina for the next month, because they have the earliest poll close of any of the swing states. And we're going to get our first look of how this election is going to go out of North Kakalaki.
All right.
And I'm definitely here for it. And the exciting thing is, as a huge nerd, we finally got, the dam broke loose. We got all kinds of polling on all of these red wall states in the past couple of weeks. And
Show
we
me.
have 4 polls all bunched up in North Carolina to get a good look at North Carolina. And what do all the polls say? Here's 2 of them, and then we'll look at the other 2.
Okay.
If I keep making this gesture, then eventually the other 2, and there they are. They'll all come in. So we got 4 polls on North Carolina. What do they all say? They all say the same thing. Donald Trump is up, but not bigly. He's up, but consistently up. And when polls agree, right, when they cluster in the same place, that gives you greater confidence that it's true. And when I say that North Carolina is Donald Trump's Pennsylvania, which is to say he's ahead in the same way that she's ahead in Pennsylvania, but it's within the margin of error. Okay. Why is it so close? North Carolina is a pretty Republican state when you get right down to it. Barack Obama, the only Democrat to win it since the
0.3%.
post-civil rights era.
Right.
Why is it so close? So I want you to look at this. Here, the Cook Political Report did a lovely thing. In their polls, they did all 7 swing states, and then they looked at what are the trends among voters, common voters there. What do you see here? Donald Trump scores better than Kamala Harris on the economy, but look at inflation.
Yeah.
Look at inflation. The reason these races are close, she's tied with him on inflation. Now, look at this. This I find even more interesting. More interesting. Look at the next graphic. On the question of immigration. Now, this is going to blow your socks off. On the question of immigration, in August, look at that. A blowout. Total blowout. Look at it in October. This is the name of the game for Kamala Harris. This is how she could win the presidency, which is she's never going to beat Donald Trump on the question of immigration. She'll probably never beat him on the question of the economy, but if she can shave down his advantage, perceived advantage on those questions, she could win states like this.
So why is that happening? Is it because Democrats have seen her and now are comfortable going to her and saying, yes, she's getting my vote? Is it it independents? Is it persuadables? Why are those numbers coming up?
Well, as the saying goes in West Virginia, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And Kamala Harris has talked about it and talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. And part of the thing, it's frustrating for decided voters, but for persuadable voters, the reason these politicians stay on message is because you got to stay on message, and she has been dogged on message.
Steyerwalt breaks it down. Thank you, sir. Still to come here on the Hill. Tim Walz out on the campaign trail today, trying to clear up some of his comments from last night against J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance out on the trail as well today. And do you want to put your money where your mouth is? Why a federal judge just cleared the way for you to do just that, betting on politics. Oh boy, it's here when we return. All right, welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. Senator J.D. Vance, Governor Tim Walz taking to the debate stage last night in the Big Apple for the first and only vice presidential debate. The Wall Street Journal out with a piece this morning, really a couple of them. One of them's titled, quote, J.D. Vance's version of Trump is better than the real thing. Vance was described as prosecuting a case with, quote, deftness and swiftness. Now, Vance hit back at Walz on Harris's economic policy during the debate. Here he was out on the trail today.
Tim, I think you got a tough job here because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens.
That, of course, Vance last evening, and after being questioned about Walz's claims that he was in China during the Tiananmen Square protests, the governor out on the trail today speaking to reporters, addressing that.
Look, I have my dates wrong. I was in Hong Kong and China in 1989.
All right, out to the full panel now. Ashley Davis, Chris Steyerwalt, Julia Manchester, Scott Bolden. Hello to you all. Nice to be with you as a group here together. They let Tim Walz out, the Harris campaign. He's finally talking to reporters.
You know, I would argue that this is what they should have done beforehand. This would have really, I think, warmed him up for last night. Now, do I think, and we were chatting about this in the green room, I don't think Tim Walz had an awful night and caused a catastrophic wound to the campaign or anything, but I think he would have come off as more polished. He hasn't been as exposed to the national stage as J.D. Vance has. He could have maybe, done more of that media training. I'm sure he was doing media training, but could have been getting out there in public.
Mistake to not put him out there earlier. I was watching TV today, and wait a minute. Tim Walz is talking to reporters.
Who let the dogs out? I mean, listen, half a dozen in one hand, six in the other. It's a moot issue right now because we had the debate last night. He's out now talking. The response here, when you're having to explain something to the press, you've lost already. But I wish his answer last night would have been just what he said on that piece, that I got my date screwed up, let's move on. Just that simple. His long elongated answer last night was painful to listen to. It just was.
J.D. Vance, you got Republicans. I've spoken to some today, Ashley, who say that was better than Trump. And you got the Wall Street Journal coming out today saying that was better than Trump. Is he a better messenger than the top of the ticket?
Yeah, and it's easier to talk about other people than yourself sometimes, too. But he's a very good debater. He's very articulate. He comes across very well, which I think he needed to. His popularity was so low going into the debate. He wasn't aggressive. But he also, there were things that he said last night that I wish Trump would have said in regards to what he just said about the economy.
Well, hence those headlines.
Yeah, exactly. Or immigration, because Trump was not able to get those out during his debate because he was talking about things that didn't matter.
Does last night move the needle? And if so, is it a significant move in one form or the other?
Well, let's say you were a woman and you were from Pennsylvania.
Oh, me.
Let's say you were a traditional Republican and you had supported George W. Bush, for example.
Me again.
Just throwing out possibilities. J.D. Vance had a message for you, right? That's who he was talking to. He took national conservatism, economic planning, tariffs, and all the stuff that makes conservatives uneasy. He took that, and he didn't change any of his policies, but he spun it up much better. And the most important thing, and this was the make or break test for J.D. Vance, he needed to show that he could be a Pencean, calm, pleasant, stable figure around Donald Trump, a reassurance to say to voters, it's okay. I know the old man gets a little loose in the turn sometimes, but I'll be there and I'll be okay. And J.D. Vance did do that.
But he failed that, though, didn't he, at the end?
Well, yes, he did. 9 out of 10, and the one that he missed was a big one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what we'll remember from that debate, at least.
And that's what the Harris campaign's putting out now.
Yeah, but that's reality, too.
Yeah, this is the
That's reality. He's not going to stop the steal, or he's going to stop the steal, quote.
Last word to Julia.
I thought his approach to abortion was also interesting, sort of trying to almost correct the GOP's messaging on that issue. This is an issue.
It's all over the place, though.
They have failed to have a coherent message on this issue. It's something that Vance and Trump have both acknowledged they have a vulnerability with. We have the Harris campaign attacking him for it, but I think he was signaling something to the GOP.
All right, meantime, you could say elections these days are a bit of a gamble, and now the U.S. courts are in agreement. A federal appeals court has declined to block a lower court's decision that, in effect, clears the way for legal betting on U.S. elections. Here we are, America. The government argued that betting would undermine election integrity. It's over a platform that allows buyers to bet on which political party will control the House and the Senate after the upcoming election. So that is now before us going forward. Speaking of going forward, before we go, coming up next, the NewsNation live simulcast of the Virginia Senate debate between the incumbent Democratic Senator Tim Kaine and the Republican challenger Hung Kao is just moments away. Our Joe Khalil is live in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Ahead of it, Joe.
Hey, Blake, this is going to be interesting to watch. It's fascinating. These are the first time these two men will be on the same stage, meeting in person, which I say is amazing because Hung Kao is down about 10 or 12 points. Tim Kaine is a known entity here. He's been a senator twice, a governor. He's popular. Hung Kao is not well known, but he and his campaign have told me they've sort of declined. A lot of the other events, campaigning has not been out as much. So tonight, he's going to have to really try to introduce himself to Virginia voters. And they think he's got an interesting backstory. He was a refugee. He was a veteran. He can parlay into policy. Tim Kaine's folks tell me they feel good. They're going to try to portray Hung Kao as someone in the ilk of Donald Trump. Blake, they think that's going to be a winning message for them. So let's see as these two engage in what's likely going to be the only debate in this race.
All right, our Joe Khalil live for us in Virginia this evening. Joe, thank you. Reminder, you can catch the Virginia Senate debate right here after the Hill on NewsNation. That is 52 seconds from now. Chris, this is cool. This is not the only one. There's going to be several of these. We talk about the White House, the House, the Senate, of course, but in many states, you've got races like this.
Yeah, we've got Nevada coming up. We've got Michigan coming up, Pennsylvania coming up. This is what is great about a network that is powered by local and bringing local to the national and national to the